Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this of this conference. I hope everybody can hear me all right.
So far,
Um,
so good.
okay, great, beautiful. Um, so um, so I just want to start by contextualizing, talking about what is fermentation, and almost every individual in almost every part of the world eats and drinks products of fermentation every day. Fermentation, I would define broadly as the transformative action of microorganisms. Mostly we talk about fermentation in the context of foods and beverages, sometimes in the context of fiber arts, medicine, but also in the context of soil fertility. With this broad definition of fermentation, that it's the transformative action of microorganisms, we could say that, every compost pile is a manifestation of fermentation. Fermentation is the process underlying traditional processes everywhere in the world for regenerating soil fertility. There's a growing interest in fermentation at the present moment, and I would say that knowledge about the human microbiome and the importance of bacteria to our health and well-being and functionality is probably the biggest thing that's driving the renewed interest in fermentation. But although there's a growing interest in fermentation, I just like to point out that the products of fermentation have enjoyed enduring popularity around the world. So, beer, wine, bread, cheese, coffee, chocolate, vanilla, pickles, sauerkraut, miso, soy sauce, vinegar, an incredible range of, everyday foods are produced by this phenomenon of fermentation. In addition to interest in the potential of probiotics to restore biodiversity to the gut and potentially improve digestion and immune function and even brain function, there are a lot of other practical benefits of fermentation. There's always a practical benefit to fermentation. The food is not decomposing into a disgusting, ugly mess that nobody would ever put into their mouths, and we're making more food stable for preservation, either short-term or long-term preservation. Or in some cases, it's about flavor and taking, very plain foods and giving them more, exciting, interesting flavors. Sometimes it's about nutrient bioavailability, making the nutrients that are embedded in foods, more easily available by breaking down chemical bonds or pre-digesting them before we eat them, which enables our bodies to uptake the nutrients much more easily. One question that has really just been of ongoing interest to me is, why is fermentation practiced everywhere? And, the interesting thing is that fermentation has been practiced for thousands of years. Fermentation is older than recorded history. All of the oldest documents that we have in different writing traditions reference ferments that were already important in those parts of the world. And it's simply part of how people everywhere make effective use of whatever food resources are available to them. But part of the answer of why fermentation is practiced everywhere is the fact that we now understand, thanks to science and the emerging science of microbiology, that all of the plants and all of the animal products that make up our food are already always populated by microorganisms, and never by singular organisms, but always by these elaborate communities of microorganisms. So, within the product of nature or agriculture that is the sort of, raw ingredient of our food, are, a range of organisms with the potential to, decompose into something that nobody would ever want to eat. Some of them have the potential to make us sick. And then some of them have the ability to elevate our food. And the interesting thing to me is that, you know, without specifically knowing of the existence of these organisms, people in every part of the world developed techniques for working with them and guiding which of these organisms would develop by means of various means of manipulating the environment. Now, I was very, very taken with Leanne's presentation of soil bread. But what I would say is that, you know, where do the organisms that are on the wheat and, you know, on the cabbage and on the soybeans, you know, where are they coming from? Like, they're always coming from the soil. Well, I shouldn't say they're always coming from the soil, because there are other sources. You know, insects landing on plants would be another source, but the primary source of, you know, where these organisms come from is the soil. So it doesn't surprise me that one could effectively make bread by adding a spoonful of soil to the starter, because, you know, the wheat or the rye or the other grains, you know, always have yeast and lactic bacteria on them. And so, and where they're beginning is the soil. And so, you know, you know, if there is the ability for people to improve their digestion, improve their immune function, and, you know, improve their, you know, there's even some new research suggesting that mental health can be affected by, you know, by diet and by, you know, eating probiotic foods. Well, you know, like, all of these, you know, organisms are coming from the soil. So there's just, you know, there's a huge connection between, you know, the microbial communities in the soil, the microbial communities on the plants that we eat, the microbial communities that drive the fermentation processes that transforms the plant into the foods and beverages that we love to eat and drink. And of course, oh, here, I should stand up and show you all my t-shirt, the organisms that are, you know, in the foods that we eat. You know, in terms of probiotics, you know, frequently people imagine that there is like a certain fermented food that has like the best probiotics, the most probiotics. But, you know, in my understanding, probiotics is about biodiversity. And so, you know, rather than thinking of a hierarchy of fermented foods that are, you know, sort of more powerful versus less powerful, I think we need to think about diversity of fermented foods. Each different kind of fermented food has a, you know, unique microbial community that's driven to some extent by the soil where those plants grew. You know, I mentioned that, I mean, I mentioned compost being a manifestation of biodiversity, and I would say that, you know, fermentation processes, microbial processes, you know, are really underlying, you know, all, you know, strategy, well, not all traditional strategies for, you know, renewing soil fertility, enriching soil. And also a lot of our efforts towards bioremediation of soils involve, you know, introducing organisms either that can, you know, consume and break down some toxic compounds that have been introduced into the soil, in order to remove them. The final thing that I'd just like to say that, you know, in terms of, you know, strategies to get, you know, urban dwellers thinking more about soil and, you know, understanding the importance of soil, you know, I want to shout out to, you know, urban gardening projects, school gardening projects, and you know, I think that these are, you know, really important for making people feel connected to the food that they eat and to the soil from which it comes. You know, and also fermentation. I mean, once people start, you know, cultivating bacteria in jars, you know, in their apartments and homes, it just, you know, it forces you to start paying attention to all of these invisible life forces that are around us all the time. So anyway, that is my brief presentation. I'm happy to entertain whatever questions people might have. But, you know, there is no fermentation without the soil with its rich microbial communities that, you know, enable plants to grow and to thrive.